Well, welcome back. We're at lesson 2, and we're going to be learning about Israel as a nation. So this is going to be largely a history lesson. I know that a lot of people don't like history, but I think you're going to be excited about what you're learning here because modern Israel has a very, very exciting history. And of course, for many centuries before that, the land was ruled by all kinds of different people, and it's just a land that's full of major events that are very exciting. Since the Crusades in the Middle Ages, the territory that was then called Palestine was ruled by the Ottoman Empire. Ottoman Empire is a Turkish empire. So you can see that Turkey is that country where the crescent moon is located. And the red area was their empire. I think it actually was more extensive than that at one point, but you can see even so, it was southeastern Europe was under Turkish rule, all of the modern country of Turkey, as well as Syria and some other parts of the Middle East, the Holy Land, Egypt, and all the way east to maybe even Libya and Tunisia were under Turkish rule. So the Ottoman Empire had it for many, many years. Ever since the Middle Ages, the Ottoman Turks controlled the Middle East. But the Ottoman Empire, like many empires, they had a history of decay. Sometimes they'd have a renewing phase where they gained strength again, but it was getting very old and very brittle by the time the 20th century came along. The biggest event in the early 20th century that we're going to be talking about is World War I. World War I was fought from 1914 to 1918, and Turkey was highly involved in it. Most people don't realize that. But it was an ally of Germany and the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And if you know your history about World War I, you'll remember that after many years of horrible fighting and many, many hundreds of thousands of deaths, in fact, I think in the end it was about 10 million deaths, the German and Austro-Hungarian and Turkish side collapsed. And the victors were the British and the French and, of course, the Americans. So at the end of World War I, they had to decide what to do with the territories that Germany and Austro-Hungary and Turkey had had. And so when it came to Turkey, the British government published a letter containing a proposal known as the Balfour Declaration. They did this about a year before World War I came to an end. And in that Balfour Declaration, the British government sort of informally, but kind of formally indicated its support for the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. So British government said the Jews need a national home where they don't have to live among the other nations, and we believe that that should be in this area called Palestine that had been ruled by Turkey. So in 1918, when World War I was over, the Turkish rule ended with the defeat of Germany and its allies. Britain and France then assumed that they were the victors, so they took over some of the Turkish territories. France ruled over Lebanon and Syria, and Britain administered the region of Palestine until 1948. And that Palestine would be the land that the current nation of Israel was formed from. So now the British have taken over the area of Palestine from 1918 until they surrendered it under pressure in 1948. Why did they surrender it? Well, because World War II came along, and again there was conflict with Germany, and again Britain came out the victor. And at the end of World War II, many Jews, the survivors of the Holocaust and Jews from other parts of the world, decided that their only hope for permanent security was in something called Zionism. That's a term you're probably going to hear on your tour. Zionism is the goal of setting up a Jewish nation because of Jewish settlement in Palestine. So the idea was Jews need to immigrate to Israel and form a Jewish nation, and that goal was called Zionism. Now, many Jews did that. In fact, many more Jews did that than the British were really prepared for. And so the British tried to clamp down on it. They wouldn't let ships dock for a while. Finally, under international pressure, with these ships full of refugees really beginning to starve outside the harbors, the British had to allow them in. And there was a flood of Jewish immigration in the late 1940s. Thousands and thousands, millions actually, eventually, of Jewish refugees flooded into Palestine. What happened there? Well, because of this mass Jewish immigration, the local people, the Arabs, they didn't like it. And neighboring nations like Egypt and Syria did not like the idea that all of these Jews were suddenly coming and living in Palestine. There is a lot of controversy about how this was done. Some of the land that the Jews occupied was purchased. They did purchase it from the Arabs, from some of them. A lot of times they purchased land that the Arabs didn't think they could use, like swamps or just barren, rocky land. Sometimes I think the Jews just squatted on the land and ended up just taking possession of it. But the British tried to clamp down on this. Obviously, there was a lot of turmoil. Different Jewish militant groups caused trouble for the British, blew up British installations, and really caused a lot of havoc. So under pressure, Britain ended its mandate to rule Palestine in 1948. They just said, we're out, we're done, we're withdrawing our troops. And that left the Jewish settlers very vulnerable because the Arabs decided, okay, you don't belong here. And many of the Arab people, not all of them, but many of them wanted to drive the Jews out. Their neighbor nations like Egypt and Syria wanted also to drive the Jews out. And so to solve this growing crisis, mediators recommended what they called the two-state solution. The United Nations wanted to form an Arab state and a Jewish state side by side in this very small region. Well, there was a Jewish agency called the Jewish Agency for Palestine, and they decided they were going to proclaim that Israel is a sovereign nation. And they made that proclamation after the British withdrew their troops. The date was May 14th, 1948. They had selected David Ben-Gurion, who had himself been a refugee from Russia, and he became its first prime minister. The United States kind of sealed the deal by recognizing Israel and has been Israel's oldest and most reliable ally. There you see a picture of David Ben-Gurion making that proclamation in 1948. Since then, Israel has successfully fought several mostly defensive wars. War of Independence in 1948, when the Arab nations decided they were going to destroy this nation before it was ever born, really. Then there was the Six-Day War in 1967, where Israel annexed the Golan Heights and East Jerusalem. I was in high school then, so I vaguely remember it. The Yom Kippur War, I was in college, and then the many wars in Lebanon. There were a number of them from 1982 to 2006. There were incursions in Gaza. Sometimes Israel even almost occupied Gaza. Sometimes there were settlers in Gaza. And from 2008, 2025, a lot of turmoil there. Of course, in 2025, when I'm making this video, this class, President Trump had concluded the peace in Gaza. We'll see if that lasts. And then, of course, there have been numerous conflicts and border skirmishes pretty much continuously throughout Israel's history. Let's talk about some quick facts about Israel. The population is nearly 10 million. Jews form about 73%, almost 3/4 of the population of Israel. But again, surprisingly to a lot of people, Arabs are about 21% of the population. They live within Israel. They can be Israeli citizens. There are some that serve in the government. And of course, there are about 6% others that live in Israel, Christians and small groups called Druze, and other kinds of people live there. More than half of the 16 million Jews in the world live in the state of Israel. The second highest number of concentrated Jews in any place in the world is New York City. Government of Israel is a parliamentary system. That means they have many parties that form coalitions in order to govern the country. The Israeli government body is called the Knesset. Its leader holds the office of prime minister, and of course its capital is now Jerusalem. It was Tel Aviv in the beginning, but they moved it to Jerusalem after the Six-Day War. The official language of Israel is Hebrew, although Arabic is used and officially recognized. Israeli currency is the shekel. However, I think wherever you go, US dollars, Canadian currency, British currency are welcomed. And of course, you can use your credit cards, but the official currency is the shekel. Israel shares borders with other countries like Lebanon to the north, Syria to the northeast, Jordan to the east, Egypt to the southwest, and of course the territories of the Gaza Strip and the Palestinian Authority. We'll talk about those a little bit later. Palestinian territories are Gaza and the West Bank. The language of those areas is Arabic. Currencies that they use are the Egyptian pound, the Israeli shekel, and the Jordanian dinar. Gaza has had a very turbulent relationship with Israel. We've talked about that just a few minutes ago. And it's been a very hostile relationship. You can see that. And then I want you to look on that map of the West Bank. There are red blotches inside the West Bank. Those are areas where you have Israeli settlements. And so this has been a huge bone of contention over the years. Many thousands of Jews have just gone into the West Bank and established settlements. I've been in some of them myself. You go into these settlements, you wouldn't know you weren't in the United States. The streets look like streets in the United States or Canada. The homes look like Southern California type homes. They've got baseball fields and it just looks like a U.S. neighborhood in many ways. And yet it's inside the Palestinian zone. Of course, it's got barbed wire fences around it. They have farms and vineyards there. I've been in an amazing vineyard on the West Bank that was run by Israelis. And of course, the Arabs resent all of this. And so there's been a lot of discussion about whether the Israeli settlements should be abandoned, whether there should be a ban on future Israeli settlements. We did one of our films in the Undiscovered Bible series right on the Jordan River near an Israeli settlement there. You wonder if there could ever be a resolution to this issue. Here's some quick facts about the Palestinian regions, Gaza and the West Bank. There are 3 zones. I don't think this applies to Gaza. This applies to the Palestinian zone on the West Bank. In Zone A, and those are not on this map. The red blotches you see are Israeli settlements. But in Zone A, it's Arab autonomy. There are no Israelis allowed. The Arabs run everything. They are basically sovereign. Zone B, the Arabs rule themselves, but Israel maintains security over those areas. Israel is very concerned about people who launch missiles into Israel from the West Bank or terrorists who infiltrate from the West Bank, and so they control the roads. Most of the main roads are controlled by the IDF, the Israeli army. And then Zone C, you have Arabs and Israelis coexisting together. So there are 3 zones in the Palestinian area of the West Bank. And of course, these Jewish settlements have been a major issue. They often appear in world news. So let's sum this up. Israel is a land that has a very ancient history. It goes back really 4,000 years at least. It's been ruled by Egyptians from time to time, then the Israelites, then the Assyrians, then the Babylonians, the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, the Arabs, the Crusaders, the Turks, and the British. Finally, the nation of Israel. Palestinians have a mixed ancestry. They include Arab background, Turkish background, as well as other groups. And they have lived in the land literally for centuries. Jews have been in the land for a long time as well. They never were completely out of the land because they've had a small presence there since the Middle Ages. But after 1945, thousands more immigrated from all parts of the world, forming the State of Israel in 1948. Since then, there's been an uneasy coexistence with several wars and conflicts breaking the peace until we reach the present day. All right, that's the end of Lesson 2. I hope this has been helpful, and we'll see you in Lesson 3.